Welcome back to Mystic Echoes today. We're diving into a story so twisted, so horrifying, it'll make you rethink the meaning of trust. Picture this: a friendly middle-aged man, always smiling, handing out free candy to kids in the neighborhood. Sounds harmless, right? But behind that smile was a monster who took the lives of at least 28 teenage boys. His name was Dean Corll, the Candyman, and the question we're unraveling today is, what turned an ordinary guy into one of America's most depraved serial killers? Let's dig into his mind, right now. Dean Corll was born in 1939 in Indiana, USA. As a kid, he was nothing special, just a shy boy raised by his mom after his parents split. Later, he moved to Houston, Texas, and worked at his family's candy business. He'd bring sweets home and share them with the local kids in the Heights neighborhood. Everyone thought he was a stand-up guy, someone you could trust. But beneath the surface, something dark was brewing in Dean Corll's mind. But what changed him? Psychologists later suggested that his childhood, abandoned by his father and smothered by an overbearing mother, planted the seeds for something twisted. He started craving power, control, things he never had growing up. Dean Corll didn't hunt alone. He built a twisted team, two teenage boys he pulled into his orbit like moths to a flame. Their names were Elmer, Henley, and David Brooks, and together, they formed a trio that turned Houston into a graveyard. But how does a grown man convince kids to help him kill? Let's break it down. David Brooks met Corll first. He was just a troubled kid, barely 12, when Corll started grooming him. Brooks came from a broken home, his parents fought constantly, and he was desperate for stability. Corll saw that. He played the big brother role, gave Brooks a place to crash, free food, and a few bucks here and there. By the time Brooks was 17, he was already in too deep to turn back. Then came Elmer Henley. Henley was 15, a dropout with a rough life, his family was dirt poor, and he was always looking for a way out. Corll spotted him in 1971 and made his move. He offered Henley $200 for every boy he could bring to the house. $200 back then was a fortune for a kid like him. At first, Henley thought it was just about partying until he saw what Corll really wanted. Corll's method was a sick game of trust. He'd tell Henley and Brooks to find boys they knew, friends, classmates, neighbors. The bait was simple: hey, wanna hang out at this cool guy's place? He's got beer, music, maybe some weed. The victims, usually boys aged 13 to 20, followed willingly. They had no idea they were walking into a trap. Once they were inside, Corll took over. He'd pour drinks laced with sedatives, sometimes sleeping pills, sometimes something stronger. Other times, he'd pull out a pair of handcuffs and say, "Bet you can't get out of these." It was a game until it wasn't. The second those boys were unconscious, the mask came off, and the real Dean Corll emerged. What's chilling is how Henley and Brooks became numb to it. They weren't just bystanders, they were accomplices. They'd stand there, watching, sometimes even helping tie the victims down. Corll had turned them into extensions of himself. And the question lingers: were they victims too, or just as guilty as he was? Step inside 636 West 25th Street, Houston. It looked like any other house, quiet, unassuming. But downstairs, in that basement, Dean Corll created a chamber of horrors. Once those boys were out cold, he'd drag them down there and strap them to what police later called the torture board. And what happened next? It's the stuff of nightmares. The torture board was a slab of plywood, about 8 feet long, with holes drilled at the corners. Corll would tie his victims down, wrists and ankles bound tight with nylon cord. They'd wake up, groggy, confused, only to realize they couldn't move. And then Corll would start. He kept a toolbox nearby: knives, pliers, screwdrivers, even a .22 caliber pistol. He didn't rush. He took his time. Some boys were stabbed, slow, deliberate cuts to prolong the pain. Others had their teeth ripped out with pliers, one by one. Corll didn't just want them dead, he wanted them to suffer. In one case, police found evidence he'd used a blowtorch. And the worst part? He'd keep them alive for days, sometimes playing music to drown out their screams, rock and roll blasting from a stereo while he worked. The bodies told a story too. When police dug them up later, many were mutilated beyond recognition, some castrated, others with signs of strangulation. Corll didn't stop at killing, he'd wrap the bodies in plastic sheets, like trash bags, and bury them in shallow graves. He had his favorite spots: a boat shed, a beach near Lake Sam Rayburn, a patch of woods. It was methodical, like he'd planned it all out. Psychologists have spent years trying to figure him out. They say Corll was a textbook sadist. He got off on the power, the control, the agony he inflicted. But there's more. His victims were all young males, mostly teens. Was it revenge against a world that made him feel weak as a kid? Or something darker, tied to urges he couldn't face? Whatever it was, he reveled in it. Neighbors later said they'd hear odd noises, banging, muffled yells, but no one ever checked. No one wanted to know. And here's what keeps me up at night: Corll wasn't sloppy. He was careful. He cleaned up after himself, hid the evidence, kept his double life airtight. For years, he tortured and killed right under everyone's noses, and they thanked him for the candy. It all came crashing down on August 8, 1973. Elmer Wayne Henley, one of Corll's helpers, brought a girl and a boy to the house. Corll flipped out. Henley had broken his rule: boys only. In a drunken panic, Henley grabbed a gun and shot Corll dead, ending the reign of terror. But the story doesn't end there. Henley called the cops and led them to empty lots and dumps where Corll buried the bodies. 28 corpses were unearthed, but many believe the true number is higher. Henley and Brooks were arrested, while Corll remained an enigma forever. So what made the Candyman? Experts say Corll was the product of a deeply damaged mind. He didn't just kill to satisfy urges, he killed to feel alive. That friendly smile, those sweet candies? Just a mask for the monster within. But here's the scariest part: no one suspected him. Not his neighbors, not his friends. He blended into society like any regular guy. And that leaves us with a haunting question: how many more Dean Corlls are hiding out there? The Dean Corll case is a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk in anyone. If you want to hear more about killers like him or dive deeper into this story, drop a comment below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a video. Thanks for watching, and be careful who you take candy from, okay?